Hi everybody, welcome back. So today I'm going to be talking about how to use a jeweler's saw to saw out a piece of jewelry. So there are a few things that you guys will need to have. And the first thing obviously being a saw frame. This is the one that I use. It's a German saw frame and it's one of my favorites, and it's also the least expensive one that I own. And I just got this off of Amazon when I first started silversmithing. And it's been with me for the past 3 years, and honestly, it does the trick. It's pretty much the main saw frame that I use for all of my pieces. Also, we'll need some good quality saw blades. This is very important because if you use cheap saw blades, you can run the risk of ruining a piece, sawing off too much, or just of course breaking saw blades, and no one wants that. So the saw blades that I like to use are these nano saw blades from Pepe Tools, and I primarily use the 5/0 just because most of the time when I'm sawing jewelry I use 22 to 24 gauge, and the 5/0 works perfectly for my gauges that I primarily work with. Now the last thing that you will need is a saw blade lubricant. And this is again very important because if your blade isn't lubricated, it's going to get stuck and ultimately break in the middle of sawing. So it's very important to lubricate your saw blade. I have this one from Auto Fray. It's just a saw blade lubricant, nothing really too crazy. But then I also have just a leather conditioner that I found works perfectly for me. I have easy access to it because I work in a leather workshop as well. But pretty much you just want anything that will, lubricate your saw blade and help your saw blade cut nice and smoothly through the metal and not get stuck in the metal. And then of course you're going to need a surface to saw on, and I just have this wooden V-top bench pin that I've attached to my workbench, and it's where I do all of my sawing work. So yeah, I'm going to get right into it, and we're going to first start off with how to load your saw blade into your saw frame. Now, before we go further, we first need to determine the correct size saw blade to use based on the metal gauge you are working with, and I've just included a little cheat sheet for reference. So when you are placing your saw blade into your saw frame, it's very important to have the saw blade face outwards. So you want the teeth facing away from the saw frame, so like that. And it's also very important to have the teeth facing downwards. Otherwise, you're just not going to get a good cut through the metal. So sometimes when you're working with a finer saw blade, such as the 5/0, it can be kind of difficult to tell which direction, up or down, the teeth are facing. So what I like to do is just hold the saw blade in my hand and then run my finger over the teeth. Now, if my finger runs nice and smoothly down over the teeth, then I know that the teeth are facing downwards, which is what I want. If I was to do it the opposite way and run my finger down over the teeth and my finger got stuck over the teeth, then I know that the teeth are facing upwards. So you want to make sure that your teeth are facing downwards because you're going to be doing most of your cutting in a downwards motion, okay? So now when I'm putting the saw blade into my saw frame, this is how I like to do it, just because it's easier, I guess, to use my full body weight than trying to pull the saw frame and get a nice tight tension. I like to just put my saw frame up against my desk and rest my body against it and kind of just squish the saw frame together a little bit, I guess, as I tighten both ends. Like that. That way when the saw frame expands again, it's going to pull the saw blade nice and taut. So when you know that your saw blade is nice and tight in there, you'll hear a high-pitched dinging noise. There. That's when you know that your saw blade is nice and taut and it's ready to be used. Now obviously the next step is to lubricate your saw blade, and you can, again, you can use an actual saw blade lubricant such as this one from Auto Fray, or you can use a leather conditioner as well, which is what I use here and there. So it's just your own preference. Now when it comes time to sawing out your piece, you want to make sure to hold your saw frame with a nice relaxed grip. You also want to keep it in an upright vertical position while you are sawing, and you want to try to use as little pressure and force as possible and really just let your saw do the work. If you use too much force or pressure, or if you tip your saw frame forward, you will break a saw blade that way. Now I'm first going to practice sawing a straight line, and the hardest part is just getting that initial mark in your piece. Now when sawing straight lines, you want to make sure to do nice long strokes, and you want to look a couple of millimeters ahead of where you want to saw. Now as you can see, there is a lot of debris that comes up during the sawing process, so you might need to just rub it away or blow it away while you are sawing. Now when it comes to sawing out curved edges, what I like to do is rotate my piece of metal while trying to keep my saw blade facing forward. I try and do smaller, shorter strokes along the curved edges while simultaneously rotating the piece. This will prevent the teeth from getting stuck in the metal and ultimately a saw blade from breaking. Now when it comes to sawing jagged lines such as this, you kind of want to use a combination of those two past techniques I was talking about. Along the straight edges, you will want to do longer strokes, and then when you get to those corners, you're going to want to do those short strokes while also rotating your piece simultaneously. Now using all of the techniques I just went over, I'm going to saw out this feather impression that has both long edges, some curved edges, and some sharp jagged corners.